Karin Slaughter. It's such an honor to have this opportunity to talk to you about your latest book. I'm really excited. Can you tell us what it's called?
Um, this is why we lied.
It's a good title.
Thank you.
Do you come up with your own titles?
I try to, and then my editor beats me down. I don't know if you had this happen where you're like, "Oh, this is such a good title," and then she's like, "No." Mm-mm.
I
Um,
think they're quite hard things to.
They are. It's harder the more books you write. Like the first Grant County series, I knew exactly what the titles would be, and I was so clear about it, and it just worked. And then later, I used to have so much of an attachment to it, but later I just thought, well, in Brazil it's this, and Netherlands it's that, and maybe I just need to let the people who know these things and what's working to go out and do their thing.
And this is number 12, isn't it, in the Will Trent series?
Yes, yeah.
And I think it's your best yet. I
Thank
think
you.
it's I couldn't put it down. It's dark.
Yeah.
It's really dark, but it's also very funny in that bizarre way that you have of marrying humor with really dark murder.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about humor a little bit later on because I want you to tell us what the book is about.
Well, it's about 480 pages, maybe longer in the UK. It's really hard for me to talk about do you have this when people are like, what's it about? And you
Oh,
just think,
it is
read it.
hard, and also I the reason I asked you to tell us and I'm not telling people is because I worry about what to spoil and what not to,
Yeah. Well, I think we can say Sarah and Will are on their honeymoon
Yep.
and they go to a very posh Echo Lodge sort of thing. And then of course somebody's murdered.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all we're going to say about the plot. I think we're
Yes.
not going to say who's murdered.
No.
It happens quite early on,
Yes.
and it's quite shocking in
Yes.
the way that it happens. And then we get a lot of backstory woven into the setup because the family who own this resort
Hmm.
are messed up,
Yes.
aren't they?
And I'm going to say that it's the McAlpin family.
Tell us about the
But
McAlpin family.
we would say in the South McAlpine, because that's what we
McAlpine.
do. Yeah,
McAlpin. So we would say, so how would you say it?
McAlpine.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
Well, I think we'd say
Oh,
McAlpine.
another thing these British people have been lying to me.
So you and I have just had a conversation about how to pronounce Will's now wife.
Yes.
They're on honeymoon, and I said because it's spelled Sara,
Hmm.
and I said, so would you pronounce that Sarah or Sarah? And you said you're saying the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. It sounds exactly. People have asked me this before, and it's like, would you call her Jane or Jane? That's how it sounds to me. But Sarah, if that makes
Sarah,
sense. Yeah.
Sarah,
Yeah.
not Sarah,
Yeah.
Sarah.
Sarah.
Um, it's as much her story as it is Will's, I
It is.
think.
And a lot of the time I focus on one character in particular, but I thought this was a good opportunity to have both of them get kind of equal weight and to write about the relationship, which it's one of the most difficult things I think as a writer you can do is write about people who are happy, and who love each other and who trust each other and all these things. And so you have to find tension in other places and you have to have them disagree, but no, that's not going to be the end of the world. I mean, we probably both grew up reading a lot of books where the tension was, oh, they're going to break up, now they're going to make up, and it's just back and forth, back and forth. And so having them happy and then having something bad happen, and that's where the tension comes from, and then they disagree how to handle this bad thing, but one of them's right and one of them's wrong, but you're not sure. That to me was a really good way to bring out tension in the relationship without having it be, oh, it's going to explode, this is it, they're never going to love each other again.
Right. And actually, one of the first lies that's told in this book is by them
Yeah.
because they arrive at the McAlpines resort and they lie about who they are.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you do this. I do it as an author sometimes because people find me far more interesting if they know I'm a writer than if they don't know that fact. Because I'm very introverted in my real life. And I'm sure when people find out you're a police officer, they have a very black and white. Either they love cops or they hate cops, or and so you know when you tell them what you do that you're opening up a conversation rather than just meeting as individuals, right? Or if you were an accountant or something, nobody really has a lot of stuff they know about accountants, right? So I thought, well, this seems really typical. Like Sarah would not say she's a doctor because she doesn't want to have those conversations about vaccines and, the, I don't know, New World Order or whatever. And Will, because he's a cop, he doesn't want to have those conversations. They just want to be together with themselves on their honeymoon. And then, of course, all that goes to hell because something really bad happens.
Right, and they're not going to ignore that, are they? So the resort itself, is it a real place?
Sort of. I told myself that I was doing research because I did actually go to one of these really shishi boutique sort of places. I felt really out of place because I'm not a shishi boutique kind of person. But it was spectacular. Like, a chef preparing your meals, and you go on these hikes, and you're not really going on like a roughing it hike because somebody's bringing a picnic basket.
Right,
But
and it's a prepared trail, isn't it?
yeah,
So it's a kind of
exactly.
curated
Yeah, you're
wilderness.
not Ponce de Leon out there. And so I mean it was really wonderful and I had a great time, but I thought like a lot of things, probably you do this too, that you experience in your author life and you think, I'm really going to make fun of this when I write about it in a book. Because it is kind of crazy when you think about what's going on in the world. There are people who are getting like picnics carried up Mount Everest for them.
So give us a bit of a sort of a picture of this resort. We've got no Wi-Fi, we've got lodges. Tell us a little bit about what it
Well,
feels
so it
like
was
to
a
go there.
lot of fun because I did want to do a locked room mystery. And because I've never done that before, and I really enjoyed the challenge of it. But you've got all these people up there. You've got this really insular family that owns the lodge, and they've got their own shit going on, and nobody who's a guest really knows about that. And then you have all these guests who are all liars also to different degrees, like why they're there, what they're doing, that kind of thing. And that just seemed like a really great way to tell a story. But also, my editor had this great idea. Like I've done maps before. Have you ever done a map?
Yeah.
It's so much fun. And did you probably did what I did. It was like I
Do
was
a really
so
awful drawing.
yeah, but I was so focused on the map. Like that was my thing. And I was like, you know what? I need to stop focusing on this map and actually write. But then we had to, it was because I have so many things on the map, like figure out where these are the individual cottages where everybody's staying. And I got to make sure they can see the house from this. And that if you're standing here, you can see the parking pad, but all this stuff. And that was a lot of fun.
It's great
Um,
procrastination, isn't it?
Exactly. And then it occurred to me, this is in the mountains. So stuff is downhill and stuff is uphill and bodies of water would be lower and that kind of thing. So I got really into the weeds about it, but it helps in the end because I was trying to figure out, okay, how do you get from here to here? And is there a shortcut? And no, you can't because you just fall off a cliff. And so that was a lot of fun.
One of the big themes that came through for me in this novel is how our child, I'm being very careful because I don't want to spoil anything, but is how our childhood impacts our adult life and
Hmm.
how trauma and events that happen in our formative years are still affecting us, many, many years later. And that's something that we see in individuals within this resort, within
Yeah.
this family,
Yeah.
but also, and I think we can probably talk about this here, within Will himself.
Hmm.
So in this book in particular, his childhood sort of comes back to haunt him. Can you fill us in, particularly for people who perhaps haven't read the other 11 books, what was Will's upbringing like?
Well, he was raised in the foster care system and he was never adopted by anyone. He was a little too old. There's this awful thing that people in adoption communities have about any kid, particularly a boy, over the age of 5 is kind of not the one you want because they're too damaged. And Will lived that life and he had this really kind of insular childhood because he's dyslexic. So, he struggled in school and he didn't have a parent advocating for him. And, he had some bullies who were in his life who made his life miserable. And now he's this man who's a special agent with the GBI and who has this wonderful relationship with this woman. And then he gets an awful reminder of what his life used to be and what his life could have been. The fact is, and you know this better than anybody, if you start out in the system, you're more likely to stay in the system as an adult. We have a lot of people, particularly in America, who have gone from the foster system into incarceration. Because we don't make life easy for them. We don't give them a lot of tools for navigating the world that even really shitty parents give their kids. So, that's something that Will is very conscious of. And he also thinks, he doesn't give himself a lot of credit for the fact that he managed to make these choices that put him on the right path, and how difficult that was. I think, uh, like me, when I accomplish something, I don't give myself the kind of credit that I would give if you accomplished it. So he has a lot of that mixed up in his personality, but he is also very out of place in this extremely expensive lodge that he's going to have to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to pay for because he was in charge of the honeymoon. And so he just kind of feels out of place anyway. And whereas Sarah feels very comfortable with these people and, being around very well educated doctors and, lawyers and that kind of thing, and she's traveled and she's seen the world. So it's a very different experience for
Mm.
her.
And she is an incredibly stabilizing influence on him, isn't he? And isn't she? And sort of in his life. But he also has Amanda, who is not just a boss, but really a sort of a mentor, I
Yes.
suppose. Can you tell us a little bit about their relationship?
Well, it's kind of one of my favorite lines about the relationship is she's like a mother if your mother is a dingo. Um, and she does mother Will. And there's a lot of backstory there if you get the previous books, that tells you more about the relationship. But she's the closest thing Will's ever had to a mother. And she has been like this rudder on his boat just as he's gone through life, steering him in one direction or the other, unbeknownst to him for a really long time.
Mm.
And she's doing the same thing in this book. She's really mad at him because she's like, don't let this job tear you down. You need to be on your honeymoon. Whatever's going on, let other people handle it. You need to be able to have your life. And she's like the worst example of this because she's dedicated her entire life to policing, and that's all she really has other than Will.
And then we've got Faith, who is a bit of a hot mess a lot of the
Yes.
time, but also gives us this great comic relief. And like I said, I want to talk a bit about the humor that you put in all your books. There's humor from a lot of the characters in this novel, but the most obvious is Faith, who
Mm-hmm.
manages to sort of just create a bit of a disaster zone, really. Tell us about Faith.
I love Faith. I think, in as much as we write about real police officers, because we're not a cop's job, it would be 90% them sitting at their desk, like doing paperwork and stuff, right?
Mhm.
Or on a stakeout that nothing ever happens. And Faith she's very pragmatic. And it represents a lot of female cops I know where you just cannot shock them. There's like nothing horrible that a human being can do that will really get to her. And actually, she's kind of disappointed if she doesn't meet the worst version of yourself. Um, and so she has a little bit of the humor that is sprinkled through the book. I think it's really important when you're writing about extremely dark things to also show the lightness. It just can't be so unrelentingly dark that you just feel really depressed, right? And Faith of all the characters represents more of my very dark sense of humor, probably in some bad ways that people don't want to know about.
Because that humor has got to come through the characters, hasn't it? You can't have situational comedy
Right.
in a thriller in the way that you might have in, I don't know, a rom-com, for example. So it's down to each character and their particular type of humor. And in other characters, in Will, for example, we see something much drier,
Hmm.
but there's still humor that comes, particularly in his conversations between him and Sarah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that a man can do that's really, really sexy is not take himself too seriously. And Will does that with Sarah. He's not, he's very conscious of the toxic things that men could do. And he just, he doesn't take himself as seriously, and he loves Sarah, and he's not worried about what other people think of him. And part of that, I think, comes from his dyslexia and being an outsider and kind of the guy everybody discounts or they don't expect much from him. And here he is, he's married to this beautiful woman. He's on his honeymoon at this beautiful lodge, before all hell cuts loose. And he's just extremely conscious of the fact that this is not the story you would have told about Will Trent if you'd met him when he was a teenager.
Mm. And do you know where he's going? Like, do you have in your head an overall arc over a number of books?
Well, yes and no. I still have more stories I want to tell. I've got a really great one queued up, not for this next book, but probably the one after, that's more faith focused. And of course, everybody's there. But I love writing the character, and I got a lot of flack for how I ended my Grant County series, so people are always worried I'm going to do that. But I think they're very interesting, and I love finding new positions and ideas and horrible situations to put them into because they're growing. The Sarah Linton you meet in Blindsided, my first novel, has changed over the years. And that was very deliberate on my part. I wanted her to grow older as I did. I didn't want her to get as old as me. But I wanted her to experience all these horrible things that were happening in a way that was believable. So she lost her husband. She's lost a lot of things in her life. She's had to rebuild herself, and she's a different person because of it.
Mm.
And to me, that's the responsibility you have if you write crime the way I do and the way you do, where you take it seriously. There's all kinds of ways to write crime. You can joke about it, or you can have all kinds of unbelievable things, or you can always fade to black when the violence happens. There's just different ways, but when you write about it in a very realistic manner,
Mm.
I think you have to be aware of the fact that these are terrible things you're writing about, and people are changed by them. Their lives are changed, and they spin out, and they make bad choices, and they make really horrible situations worse because of the damage that happened to them. And so that's what I like to write about. And with Sarah, I think it's just I've kept telling that story. I've got more stories, and it's the same thing with Will.
So let's talk a little bit about your process. When you get an idea, what form does that take? Is it a complete story that's landed, or is it a sort of a question, a particular nugget or a setting? Where does it come from, that spark?
Nugget. Um, it's all those things, really. I mean, it depends on the book, because the first question is this a Will and Sarah story, right? And if it's not, then what world am I going to put it in, and
So
how is
how do
that
you
going to
know whether
look?
it's a Will and Sarah story?
I wish I could pinpoint it, but it's more like a feeling, and the stakes are different, right? Because you're not going to kill off your main character at the beginning of a book, right? Maybe. Please give me credit for that if you do it. But it's different stakes. It's with Sarah and Will, it's definitely more procedural. And, that's one thing I liked about doing This Is Why We Lie, because on one hand, it's very procedural, but you've got this other part of the story that's not procedural at all, right? It's just sort of suspense and anticipation, and you don't really know where it's going. And it was very fun to blend those together. But the story's just sometimes I have an idea and I'll write it down and I won't come back to it for years, or sometimes I have something I'm very excited about. And I don't know how you work, but I usually have 3 or 4 different ideas. And what I do, because I'm a baller, is I meet with my editor usually in the first part of the year. Sometimes in Miami because HarperCollins has their sales conference there, and it's great because I can just get on a plane and go to Miami. And this sounds so wonderful. We just like sit around in the hotel room and we talk about what the book is going to look like. And it's really great because my editor's been with me since my second novel. I say she's my brain's best friend because she's very good at pulling out what I'm trying to say and, okay, well, what's going to happen here? And it's funny because she wants to be surprised too. And sometimes I'll say, okay, well, I've got that locked down. You'll just have to read it. Also, we've gotten a little older, so even if I tell her, she might forget it by the time she reads it. So that's a good collaboration, but it's a way of talking through the story, and maybe this isn't ready to be told right now. Okay, what other idea do you have? And just kind of feeling our way through it. And in 2 days, we usually have a good idea and a couple of pounds gained from all the snacks, and it's a lovely way to do it. I feel very
Okay, so then
spoiled.
you return home
Yes,
to Atlanta, is that right?
yes,
With a really solid idea for what
yeah.
you're going to be writing. How much do you then plan before you start writing it?
Well, we plan it out very well, and then I forget all about it. And so I'll get into the book and I'll think, wait a minute, wasn't I supposed to do something? And I'll go back and look at our notes and think, oh, well, that's a really good idea. So I think of Miami or wherever we meet to go over things. I think of it as like little gifts for future Karen. And then future Karen gets it and opens the file and says, "Oh, we anticipated this. This is what I said I wanted to do," and that's very helpful.
And how long does it take you to write that first draft?
Well, so I don't really draft like a lot of people do, where they write the entire book and then they go back and yeah. So I do it as I go along, and every time I sit down to start a new session of writing, I read what came before. And so that's when I'm really drafting, I guess. But the whole time, maybe 4 months, and I'll write for 2 weeks and I go up to my cabin in the North Georgia mountains and I'll be sequestered there. And then I'll come home for a week and just be exhausted and think I'm never going to write again. And then I'll go up for 2 weeks. And I think it's played well into my style of writing because there's these intense bursts, and I've always felt like a book should work like a roller coaster. The plot is the track, right? And then the car is the emotional thing that goes there. So they go together. But you can generally tell when these peaks are. You're like, oh, Karen was at the cabin and then she came home. She was at the cabin and then she came home. So that's generally what my formula is.
When you're writing in the cabin, what does that look like? Have you got a desk there? Do you spend all day at your desk? Do you write in bed?
The right in bed. I have I sit in a recliner and I've got my books around me and I look out and I can see the long range mountain view and mountain laurel and sometimes there's a deer. But I just sit there and sometimes it's 5 hours, sometimes it's 16 hours. I just sit there writing on my laptop. And that's how I've always done it. But I will say, as I've gotten older, it's much harder to get out of that chair. Sometimes I'm
Do you
like,
make the
oh,
noise?
oh, I do. Ooh, yeah, yeah, it's really hard. And I have these great ideas about, oh, I'm going to be on the treadmill every day. Do you do this? You're like, oh, I'll be on the treadmill every day, and then I get into it, and 18 hours has gone by, and I haven't, only gotten out of the chair to eat some cheese or go to the bathroom.
At the end of those 4 months, then, when you've finished it, is that pretty much finished?
Yeah, I mean, obviously my editor looks at it and I'll send her chunks along the way just to make sure I'm on the right track. But then she gets it all together and then my US editor reads it and finds the things that we missed, like, hey, this character had blue eyes and that was really important to the plot. Now they're green or, things like that you just, when you're writing a book, you forget.
So I don't think I knew this. So your primary editor is your UK
Yep.
editor. So
Yeah.
how did that come about?
Well, my first editor in the US kind of abdicated to Kate. I delivered a book, my second book, Kiss Cut, and my US editor, who's a lovely person, but she's not editing anymore, not because of me. She just decided not to do that anymore. She said, okay, yeah, well, put it in. And I got a call from Kate, and she said, um, really like the book. I said, thank you. And she said, I feel like it ends a third of the way through. And I said, yes, that's right. And I think that's the thing about a good editor. Anybody can say, this isn't working, but to say, this isn't working and this is why.
Yeah.
And here are 3 ways to fix it. And I never use her ways, but well, maybe sometimes I use her ways, but it makes me think about it, right? And she's very good at saying, okay, maybe this part isn't working. And she makes me think about that in context. And I think, oh, well, actually, this part is working. It's 5 chapters earlier that's not. And we just have a really good way of communicating. And, she's going to tell me I'm wrong if I'm wrong, which is incredibly valuable. And that's the thing. I think a lot of successful authors, they just hand in the book and that's it. But I want to get better. I want to always make sure every book I write is the best book I can write at the time. I want to do something new and interesting. And actually, Tess Gerritsen and I were talking about this because she's got a spy novel she just wrote. And if I think if you're really interested in writing and learning to be a writer, and you continue to be questioning what you're doing, and you have interests varied across genres and that sort of thing, that you can have longevity in your career. We all know authors who are writing the same book over and over and over again, right? And after a while, they're boring. And the only writer that I think has beaten this is Lee Child, and that's because every setting is new.
Yeah.
And Reacher's going to get to a town, there's going to be some bad guys, he's going to shoot him in the kneecaps, everything's going to be good. But he makes it so interesting each time.
And it's a completely different cast of characters.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a very particular way of writing a series, isn't
right.
it?
But it's a way to keep yourself interested too, yeah. Right? Because you've got to look at these towns and you've got to think, okay, well, the last guy was this redneck asshole. Maybe I need to make this guy a liberal dick. I mean, it's just a new way of looking at each story. And I love that part of it.
And do you love the non-writing part of being a writer?
Most of it's the travel. I don't, if I could never be on an airplane ever again, but it's great. There's so many readers I have that have stuck with me through my career, and I get to check in with them and see them. And, even going to festivals and things like that, you see very familiar faces, and I like doing that. And I like hanging out with authors, even though sometimes we might get in trouble. But I mean, it's an incredible life, though. I mean, if you think about it, just what we do for a living does not make sense in any way. I have family members they have no idea, why are you traveling so much, or why are you doing this? And it's a wonderful life. I feel very grateful to have it.
And what about social media and hanging out with readers online? Do you enjoy that too?
I do. I have to be careful because all I'll do is post cat pictures, and
we all love your cat pictures on Instagram.
I'm really bad about vetting people. I had to stop following people because it's like, if you post a cat, I will follow you. And then I'll find out that you are like a eugenicist or something. It's like, oh, wait. So I had to stop following people. But I do love my cat content.
We all love it too. And we love your books. And This Is Why We Lied, I think, is your best yet. And it's out now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.